character death meaningful. Most of the time, having a player die in D&D sucks. All the backstory for this character, the character development, and all the future quest or quest hook tie-ins have gone down the drain. Unless your player makes Human Fighter number 57 the twin of Human Fighter number 56 as their next character. Now, this video is not meant as a call to action for DMs to kill their players. Do not leave this video and start building an encounter to TPK your party. First editions of D&D had character death and brutal combat left and right, so making death interesting may be more of a chore at these tables. But for these DMs, take what you think will improve your table's experience. Unceremonious deaths can make your game feel realistic at these kinds of tables, because not everyone gets a heroic, cinematic, or bombastic death. The trade-off is, the player is still around after that unceremonious death, and will likely not enjoy the fact that their character died to an orc that landed one too many critical hits, or was shoved off into a pit, never to be seen again. The best character deaths are the ones that happen at a narratively compelling moment. Some of my favorite ways to have characters meet their end is fighting something big and cool, like a dragon or some antagonist from their backstory, which sounds much cooler than dying to a goblin. They could sacrifice themselves fending off an impending doom, like a horde of monsters or a deadly trap, or by suffering the consequences of their actions. In other scenarios, like a random encounter, I'd say it's okay to pull your punches to avoid unsatisfying character deaths. If your party's next encounter is going to be deadly, make sure your players know that. The simplest way we can do this is by playing our version of the Star Wars Imperial March theme, or the Lord of the Rings Nazgul theme. We can also incorporate a common symbol or symbols that clue your players in, like the logo of your big bad. We can even use sensory cues like all fire is blue in this deadly dungeon, or it gives your PCs goosebumps or shivers, or whispers can be heard periodically throughout the dungeon. We want these cues to be consistent, that way we are conditioning our players to take this dungeon or encounter seriously. Once you've made sure your players know this is a deadly encounter, let the dice land where they land in those boss battles. And don't be afraid to play strategically. Try to avoid killing the PC in the encounter too early. Combat encounters especially can take a long time, and once the PC is dead, there's a good chance that person is going to whip out their phone and not engage for the rest of the encounter. But once it's guaranteed the PC is going to die, like they fail their last death save or is going to suffer damage greater than their total hit points, allow them a last hurrah while letting them describe how their character dies. Then let the other players at the table describe their reaction to this scene. This will enhance the drama and hopefully rally your other players. The Game of Thrones show has plenty of examples of ceremonious and unceremonious deaths. A spoiler warning in case you haven't seen Game of Thrones. You can skip to this timestamp in 3, 2, 1. For ceremonious, Viserys Targaryen, death by molten gold poured over his head, was absolutely wild. And Ramsay getting eaten by his own dogs was definitely a fitting end for him. For the unceremonious, Sir Barristan just getting stabbed and dies without saying a word after taking out 13 or so men. And Littlefinger, one of the most devious little rats, getting his throat slit instead of being outsmarted. Short rant over. Now, let's talk about what happens after the PC dies. If the party can resurrect the PC, then let them. I disagree with the notion that resurrecting PCs should be difficult or require a roll for the spell to work. If your players have the spell components and the spell slot available, let them cast the spell and let it just work. DMs, don't put an obstacle in front of your player that literally made a character for this reason. You are stealing your players' time to shine if you have them roll when casting Revivify and they fail the made-up DC. If the party can resurrect the PC at a later time, like back in town, then it is important to remember that by having NPCs like this in your world would make that NPC a significant person, a real MVP. And side note, if your party can resurrect people, take note of this, DMs, because then they would surely be of significant importance as well. With that said, there would likely be some hurdles or obstacles to get a PC resurrected that could lead the party into a side quest, like maybe resurrecting people is kept secret as to not have the entire town or bad actors demanding its service constantly, requiring your party to seek it out. Perhaps the service is well known and extremely expensive and/or has a long waiting list, and your party needs a way to skip the line. Perhaps the god of death in your game doesn't like resurrections. I'm looking at you, Puss in Boots. And there is a curse that needs to be broken after the character is resurrected. Really think about how, if we had resurrection in our world, how would that change things for us? Now, you don't have the player just wait around to get revived. You want them back in the game. So at the very least, create NPC hirelings at levels 5, 10, and 15 that are the basic archetypes: Evocation Wizard, Thief Rogue, Champion Fighter, and Life Domain Cleric. Then have the player choose one at the closest level to what they are now. This will allow them to try out a new class or continue playing as something they are familiar with. And after this NPC is used, replace them with a new one, or make multiple from the start in case multiple players die. Remember though, making a level 15 Cleric means they can cast Resurrection. So if you are going to include a Cleric at level 15, ensure they can't cast Resurrection for some reason, like they won't cast Necromancy spells, they already spent their 7th level spell slot, make them a level 12 Cleric instead, or they simply don't have the components for it. It should be obvious as to why you don't want a hireling casting Resurrection after meeting them in the next room. Which leads me to my goal. Introduce the hireling as soon as possible, so that the player can continue playing. We don't want them left out during the session, while also not providing a way to resurrect the player at that moment. So the hireling can be found hiding in the next room as a lone lost explorer, a captured individual who was chained up for nefarious purposes by the adversaries of the recent encounter, or the hireling stumbles upon the group while they're taking a short rest after the encounter. Whatever the case may be, get them back into the game as soon as possible. When your players do get to revive the character, there's one last thing to consider, and it's, what does the afterlife look like in your setting? And what was that like for the revived character? Maybe you rip them from the bliss and tranquility of the heavenly planes, from the loss and confusion of limbo, from the fear and torment of the underworld, or from simply nothing at all. Someone being brought back from the afterlife will be changed forever, to either fear death even more or welcome its next embrace. If there is no means of resurrecting the player, then rolling up a new character is the next step. But first, let's think of the character's epilogue. Perhaps the fallen character returns as a ghost and asks the party to fulfill one last request for them, or they keep a note in case they die that explains their final wishes. You can have the players fight a boss version of the fallen character in a dream as to allow for a no-stakes combat encounter, letting the player play their character one last time in an epic PvP match. Give them legendary actions, a list of magic items they can choose from, and minions that you play but they control. At the very least, have one last event to remember them by. Having a funeral where they are buried somewhere the players can revisit, scatter their ashes somewhere special, having something built and/or named after them, commissioning a statue in their honor, having the rest of the party craft wearable mementos, or have the party inherit a weapon or piece of clothing of their lost comrade. With their memory honored, we can get into creating a new character. I only have a few things to say about this. I think it's important to allow the player to create a new character at the same level as their fallen one. If the character wasn't completely annihilated, I'd go as far as to allow them to keep all their items and gold as well. The character's death alone is significant enough, and not carrying over levels or items is like throwing salt and alcohol on a gaping wound. Creating the new character with some backstory tie-in to the previous one is also important, so that the backstory for the previous character is still relevant. Maybe the new character is a bounty hunter that has been tracking the PC for some time now, or a former colleague that was researching the same thing the PC was, or a family member that wants the same thing the PC wanted. Or maybe the new character is the previous one's #1 fan. Other than these points, players, create whatever character you want. Try out a new class or race, or maybe continue to play the NPC the DM created. Just reroll the stats, adjust the level, and find a tie-in to the previous character. DMs, it's okay to retcon this info and put these NPCs into your game permanently. That's all I've got for this video. Hopefully these tips help make death in your game a little more meaningful or memorable, and keep your players enjoying the game even after they die. DMs, send this to your players to get them thinking about what happens if their character dies. And players, send this to your DM if you want more meaningful character deaths. Everyone else, send this to someone who you think would enjoy this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, and while you're there, feel free to hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I'm DNDev. New video soon. Until then, I'll catch you in the next one.